Awesome. All right, so thank you all for having me. This is the first time I've been to Huntsville, and what a beautiful, clean, safe-looking city. I was surprised. It was great. It's been great, so thank you for having me. So Tony Mormino is my name. I host a YouTube channel called HVAC TV. It's not my channel. It's the company's channel that I work for, which is called Air Control Concepts. Air Control Concepts owns a bunch of rep firms in the country. One of them is Hobbs and Associates, and I got Zach Haig with me here from Hobbs, who's helping out today, running the camera. So he's here with me today too. So we're going to talk about A2L refrigerants and the migration to A2Ls. When I say A2Ls, does anybody know what that means? Has anybody heard that before? Heard that term? A little bit? Okay. Well, good. Well, I'll be able to teach you something then. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is what's going on in the industry in terms of refrigerant transitions. We're going to talk about replacements for R410A refrigerant. Does anybody know what R410A is? Okay. How many in this room deal with refrigerant issues on a daily basis or are familiar with them? Handful of you. Okay, so this is going to affect, this particular transition is going to affect pretty much a lot of different facets of the facilities, not just the maintenance side of things. So we'll talk about that, and then we're going to talk about what are A2Ls, which is really the whole issue we're dealing with in terms of the transition this time. We're going to look at some codes and standards, and then we're going to talk about real life stuff, like stuff you're going to have to deal with because of the transition, okay? And please ask any questions. If you have questions, please ask them. I might know the answer, and I'd be glad to give it to you. So first, let's start with what is a refrigerant, right? We'll just get right down to basics. So it's a liquid or gas used to move heat from one place to another, right? So your air conditioning system blows cold air in this room. This air is cooled by a refrigerant in a cooling coil. It pulls in the BTUs when it's cooling, and it dumps it outside. So that's a refrigerant. Okay, some common refrigerants are, we've all heard the word Freon. I think it was mentioned in the introduction, which is R12 and R22. We don't really use those anymore, but Freon is used typically as just a blanket word for refrigerants. R410A is very popular today. It's probably the one most common one in your facility. And then we have natural refrigerants like CO2, ammonia, and things like that. Okay? So every air conditioning unit, whether it's a split system in your home, whether it's a window unit, whether it's a couple of 50-ton package units, or a couple centrifugal chillers, Johnson Controls in the house. There's some of your chillers there. By the way, I used to work for Trane. Are there any Trane people here? A couple of Trane folks here? Okay. So I started my industry. I didn't talk about this in the beginning, but I started in 1997 in a school in Gainesville, which I won't talk about. And then I left that. I moved out of there and went to Jacksonville, worked for Trane for 10 years. And then I left Trane and I worked at a rep firm where we sold various different products, and then I've been doing this for 5 years. This is a little bit of my history. So I've been in industry for about 25 years. Okay, so we're talking about refrigerants. This is actually a unique look at refrigerants in a system. So this is a demo unit. Obviously in HVAC systems, you don't see clear tubes like that, but this was made so that you can see the refrigerant flowing through the evaporator and condenser. So at some stage you can see it's a gas, some stage it's a liquid. It's amazing to me how fast it flows and it's able to still do its job. So I took this video at one of our manufacturing facilities and I've showed it a bunch because it's, I don't know, it's pretty cool. Okay, so refrigerant history. So R12 was invented in 1928, Freon, and it was used safely until 1996, and we switched to R22. Was anybody around in the industry when this happened? And it was a big, it was a big deal, especially for centrifugal chillers. It was like a big war about the refrigerants and everything. So in 1996, so for 68 years, we used 12. In 96, we went to 22. And then in 2010, the HVAC industry was regulated to change to 410A, which is the majority of refrigerant you see today is R410A. Okay? Unless you're like me and you still have a R22 unit in your home, which is what I have. I have a new unit, but I haven't put it in yet. It's sitting on my porch. So I'll get there one day. So these refrigerants were CFCs. Is anybody familiar with that term? Anybody remember in the 80s, CFCs and what it was doing? The environmental concern, ozone layer, big hole in the ozone? Okay. So let's talk about that for a minute, then we're going to talk about why we're changing this. Okay. So the ozone layer is a layer of this, O3. Oxygen's O2, ozone is O3. O3 keeps out the bad stuff from the sun. The sun produces some rays. Some of them we want to come to the planet, some of them we don't. The O3 molecule blocks it out. What happens is CFCs, there's a shooter there. CFCs, chloral fluorocarbons, chloral is chlorine. Chlorine does not play well with O3. So when chlorine gets in the atmosphere, it kills the ozone. Okay? That was the whole reason why the environmental movement was to get rid of CFCs. Okay? We get rid of CFCs, the ozone, the blue is the hole, got smaller. So today the ozone layer it's page 8 news. You know, it's not frontline news anymore. You don't hardly hear about it. It turns out most of that was caused by I'm waiting for the day I show that and somebody in the audience says, that's me, or that's my sister. But hairspray had a bunch of CFCs in it. Remember that? Okay? So the distinction I like to think about is hairspray we were just blowing in the atmosphere. Okay? Refrigerants, we don't typically do that unless there's a tech not doing what they're supposed to do and they're doing it illegally. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation because that's important. Okay, so we got rid of the CFCs. We got HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, no chlorine. So problem solved, right? Okay, but wait, there's more. I found that yesterday, but I can't remember what that guy was selling. Does anyone remember? OxyClean guy. That's what it was. So he's in this presentation a few times. You think you got it, and then you don't. That kind of thing. That's what I was going for with that. So, all right. So today's all about what? Wait a second. Let me back up. I did that wrong. So today's all about what? Global warming. Do y'all do global warming in Alabama?
No.
We don't do.
We try not to.
So I have guests on the podcast from California, New York, North Carolina, Tennessee, and it's like different worlds in terms of beliefs and what's going on in the environment. So anyway, I'll present to you what's driving this whole thing. So global warming is driving everything. In terms of the refrigerant transition, electrification, has anybody heard that term? Decarbonization, are you starting to see effects to your facility from those? Okay, all that's being driven by this, global warming, okay? So global warming, the sun, again, produces electromagnetic rays. Those rays hit the surface of the earth, they hit buildings, they hit surfaces, heat's generated, some of the heat goes away, some of it gets trapped in the atmosphere, which is good, so we can live, right? The atmosphere that surrounds the earth is made up of a lot of air, and air is made up of primarily nitrogen, some oxygen, which is important, other gases, 1%, mostly argon, whatever that is, and something called carbon dioxide, which is CO2. CO2 makes up 0.04% of the atmosphere, and it's good to have because it's a greenhouse gas and it keeps us alive. It's a good deal. CO2 comes from a lot of natural things, burning of wood, burning of coal, fossil fuels. When I go home and light my wood-burning stove tomorrow night and relax, I'll be putting CO2 up in the air. Humans give off CO2. Animals give off CO2 from both ends. But it's natural. It's a part of the environment. Plants need it to live. It's a good thing. When we get out of balance, it's probably not a good thing if we're putting too much of this stuff in the air, okay? So that's the concern with global warming. If we put too much stuff, we trap too much heat, Ice melts, the seas rise. You get the deal. Okay, so that's driving everything. So global warming potential, has anyone heard this? GWP, you've heard of, everyone's heard GWP? Okay, let me explain to you what that is. So if you're trying to solve a problem, you got to kind of have some numbers to measure the global warmingness of certain, elements. So oxygen has a global warming potential of 0. It doesn't trap in any heat. Okay? Oh, I didn't know there's a screen back there. It's nice. Nitrogen is 0. Okay? Does anyone know what CO2 is? The global warming? 1. So CO2 is the baseline of global warming potential. So if something has a GWP of 3, it's 3 times more, has the ability to trap heat 3 times more than CO2 does. Okay, so everything goes as a comparison to CO2. That's a very simplified explanation. You could read for hours about how they calculate that, but basically that's the gist of it. Does anybody know what the GWP of R410A is? Or want to take a guess?
5,000.
5,000. We got 5,000. Anyone else? You want to go like 4,999 to get like right under? 0.5? 2,300. Close. 2,088. Now, that's not, for refrigerants, that's pretty normal. It's not a big deal. And again, we're not spewing this stuff in the atmosphere like CO2 if we're burning something, okay? So you got to keep that in mind. Refrigerants, at least in our industry, I'm speaking for HVAC, is in a closed system. Some of it does leak. If it's handled properly, we're not just putting it in the atmosphere. And that's one of the problems I have with a lot of these changes is, the EPA, they're not calling me and asking me my opinion. They're not calling you and asking you your opinion. There's not enough HVAC professionals, technicians, engineers involved in these decisions, which is a little bit frustrating. So you have folks who are making, something's got to change. Well, let's look at these refrigerants and let's lower the GWP. Doesn't it all take into account the efficiency and so there's a lot of things that it doesn't take into account, okay? As HVAC people, we are just reacting to these policies. All the transitions of refrigerants I showed you before, if you ask any HVAC guy, we would still be with 12. It was used for 70 years. We didn't have a lot of problems with it. Anyway, so that's my rant about how I really feel about what's going on. So something's got to be done. Let's limit the GWP of refrigerants, and I'm picking on R410A because that's the most popular one. So Congress passed something called the AIM Act. Has anyone heard of the AIM Act? I didn't hear. I didn't know anything about it until I put this preso together. But basically, it's a law that says someone's going to regulate the refrigerants, and they decided that the EPA is the best person to regulate that. So the EPA is the one that puts out the rules, the GWP limits, when to transition, this kind of thing, okay? Any questions, by the way? We'll get to more of the practical stuff here in a minute, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of the history because people are like, why do we keep changing these things? So the EPA asks the question, what GWP level? They meet with some industry folks and for HVAC come up with 700. I'll show you how they came up with that in a minute, but basically that's the limit we're dealing with when we're talking about air conditioners and chillers and VRF systems. The refrigerant cannot have a GWP over this value of 700. And I could tell you that's probably going to change. It's probably going to go down. The drive to lower GWPs of refrigerants is not stopping here, okay? If you like to print things out and read them, this would be a good document. If you want to put a folder together or something, this is the EPA's Technology Transition Program. It explains the GWP limits per sector and subsector. So this is one paragraph out of this manual. I don't know how long it is, but not just HVAC uses refrigerants, right? So you might in your facilities have vending machines, you might have retail food storage, and you can see the associated values of GWP on the left, okay? This is more for manufacturers to have note of. So you'll see some of these are like 150 GWP. So why do you think that is versus HVAC being 700? The reason is because they can. In HVAC, we can't. We don't have the refrigerant technology yet to get that low. So they might use something like propane, for example. That's my friend Sean. He doesn't look too happy that I'm taking his photo, does he? He's really not a grump. He looks like a grump in that picture. All right, so what do we do now? Where do we go now? Anyone know who that is? Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses. I saw him on Instagram singing the other day. It wasn't pretty. God bless him. By the way, thanks for the prayer in the beginning. That was very sweet. Don't see that very often. Okay, so you're an HVAC manufacturer. Took this at a factory visit I was at. And you're using R410A. What do you do if it's going away? So you don't have a lot to choose from a refrigerant standpoint. But you want to find something that's close to R410A. Otherwise, you have to redesign the machine. It's going to increase the expense. You know, there's a million things that come into play when changing a refrigerant. It's a huge pain in the butt, okay? No manufacturers enjoy this process that I've talked to, and I talked to a lot of them. And by the way, a lot of the information I'm giving you, if you try to look this stuff online, at least for me, it's very confusing. I fortunately work with a lot of the top guys in the industry, and they tell me like really what's happening. So you got to choose which refrigerant to go with. We're going to do a quick comparison, and then I'll show you where the industry ended up. Okay, so you got a manufacturing facility. You got to get rid of R410A. You go out there and you start looking at the options. Okay. The columns here, by the way, are refrigerant, global warming potential, and ODP, which is ozone depletion. We don't really use that anymore because we've already taken care of that, but I'm going to put it up there anyway. So R22, which is a great refrigerant, but the GWP is too high and the ODP is too high, so we can't use that. Does anyone know what 407C is? I know some people in here have seen that. We don't see it very often, but anyway, that's another option that's similar to R410A, but the GWP is too high. So as we start looking at other items down the list, R32 looks like a good fit. It's 675 GWP. Then there's a refrigerant called R454B. That's another good fit. And then you've got your natural refrigerants like propane and CO2. Okay? So when you look at this list, you can quickly eliminate the top three because they don't meet the GWP requirement. Propane sounds nice, except what's the issue with propane? It'll blow you up kind of thing. CO2 is a great refrigerant, but it works at very high pressures, which is not really feasible to use in air conditioning. You could add ammonia to this list, which is very popular in industrial facilities, but it's corrosive with copper. And there's a lot of copper in an HVAC unit. And it'll kill you if it leaks. So that's the other thing. Went too fast there. So 32 and R454B, those are the two refrigerants you're going to be using in your facility starting now or when you get new equipment, okay? Those are the two viable options. So let's look at those two refrigerants. We'll do a quick rundown of the operating pressures, component mix, et cetera. So we already looked at the GWP, okay? So not all refrigerants are a pure refrigerant. They're a blend of other refrigerants. All right. So interestingly, R410A is a blend of R32 and R125. Okay. Has anyone heard of R32? Anyone heard of that? Okay. You've heard of it? Okay. I'll say this too. These refrigerants are nothing new in the world. They're new to us. We tend to be a little slow on the whole environmental change thing in the US compared to like Europe. So they're already on to the next thing, which whatever that is, I think it's propane. So anyway, R32 is R32. It's all R32. There's no blend. R454B is a combination of R32 and 1234YF. Does anybody know what that is?
Another flammable.
It is flammable. Do you know where it's used mostly?
Automotive.
In your car. So if you've got a car that's less than 10 years old, you probably have an A2L refrigerant in your car. And there's other flammable stuff in your car too. It's called gasoline. So All right. Operating pressures are extremely important. When you're talking about designing a machine for a new refrigerant, you can see the operating pressures are pretty similar to 410A, so it's a good option. Discharge temperatures for 32 is a lot higher. Just be careful if you're a tech. Don't touch the discharge line with your forearm. It's already hot enough. Okay, so when you're looking at refrigerants, you're also talking about efficiency and capacity. So capacity is like how many tons you get per pound of refrigerant. Efficiency is how much work do you have to do, energy to put in to get a ton of refrigeration out of it, okay? Both of these refrigerants, I talked to several major manufacturers and they said this did not play into the decision as to which refrigerant to use because most companies are deciding we're going to do 454B or we're going to do 32. There's engineering considerations in there, and there's also political considerations in there in terms of who manufactures the refrigerant. You don't want to give business to your competitor, this kind of thing. But in terms of efficiency and capacity, they're pretty similar. Okay? So, it looks pretty simple. Now you can go and switch to one of these refrigerants, right? There he is again. But wait, there's more. I got to get some lessons on how to make that like really funny. Okay. So here's the what, but wait, there's more issue. If the presentation stopped here before this slide, we wouldn't even be probably talking. A2L is what's causing all the problem. So 410A is what's called an A1 refrigerant, which is, for our purposes, non-flammable. These are lightly flammable, have low flammability to them. So that changes everything, okay? That's what the big deal is. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about what A2Ls actually are. Because you're going to be hearing this, if you haven't already, A2L refrigerants. Most people are referring to R32 and 454B as A2Ls. Even the title of this presentation is transferring to A2L refrigerants or migrating or whatever word you want to use. Okay, so ASHRAE. Anyone here go to ASHRAE? Couple folks. So that's the HVAC's IFMA. That's our used to be American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. Now it's just ASHRAE because it's worldwide. Okay, they issue standards. One of the standards they issue is standard 34, which is right there. That standard defines the toxicity and flammability of refrigerants. Okay, and they do that by this chart right here. This is actually out of the actual standard. So on the horizontal axis, you have toxicity. So lower toxicity is an A, higher toxicity is a B. Okay? On the Y, or vertical axis, you have the flammability. So you have no flame propagation, which is the 1. Lower flammability, which is the 2L. Flammable is 2. Higher flammability is 3. Okay? So that's where A2L comes in. It's non-toxic, or it has lower toxicity, and it is slightly flammable. I heard the term mildly flammable. That's the one I use a lot. And 410A is an A1 refrigerant. Okay, does anybody know what an A3 refrigerant is? Propane, A3. B3 is ammonia, toxic kind of thing. Okay, so how flammable is it, right? When I hear the word flammable, I think of, like my propane grill. You light it and there's flame that comes out of it. So let's look at what that actually means because there's a lot of fear in the industry about that. Here's how you determine the flammability of refrigerant. You take this beaker, you put a sample of refrigerant in there, you stir it up, you put a stopper on top, and then you hit it with a charge. You hit it with an electrode. And then they measure the flame spread. Okay, we're going to look at some actual photos of that. So let's start with 410A. There's no oil in these, by the way. Put the 410A in there, we stir it up, we hit it with the charge, we take a photo. So do you see these yellow lines here? Any refrigerant flame that stays within the yellow 90-degree lines is considered an A1. Okay, so 410A is an A1. So we're going to take that out. We're going to put the R32 in there, or the R454B. How far past that yellow line do you think the flame's going to go? Like all the way over here, or just, yeah. Okay. So that's the actual test picture. So you can see that little bit of difference there causes it to go into another category. A2L, all right? And that's an A3. So when I'm thinking about flammability, that's what I thought when I first saw it. Okay, we're going to look at some guys here trying to light it and show you the actual flammability nature of it. So, okay, any questions on that? And I would say too, if you have anybody in your facility who's concerned with using these refrigerants, you can use the car example. You know, you have that already in your car. I do? Oh my gosh. That kind of thing. All right, so I'm going to play a minute of this video, which I think does a good job showing the actual refrigerant.
A key parameter in determining the actual risk of a gas to ignite is the mixture reaching its flammability limits in air. The lower flammability limit is important, as you need to have enough gas mixed with air in order for it to reach its flammable concentrations to ignite and burn. So if during a leak situation, the leak rate and the quantity released is large enough that it surpasses the lower flammability limit, flammable concentrations can form. Propane is a commonly used low GWP refrigerant in small refrigerated cabinets, but its lower flammability limit is only 2% propane by volume in air. This means that for even small charge sizes, the flammable layers can form and actually ignite and burn. You typically need 4 times more A2Ls to reach flammable concentrations as compared to A3s such as propane. Hence, A2Ls are inherently safer as you're less likely to form flammable concentrations. This means much higher quantities of low GWP A2L refrigerants are necessary just to be flammable, which means there are a number of leak scenarios for these A2Ls that would not even result in any consequential flammable volumes. Another key parameter in determining whether a mixture actually ignites or doesn't ignite is the minimum ignition energy, or the MIE. The minimum ignition energy is important, as most electrical components actually can produce electrical sparks under normal operation, unless they're specifically designed to actually avoid that. If the energy of the spark or the electrical discharge is higher than the minimum ignition energy, then in a specific leak scenario, you can actually ignite the mixture if flammable concentrations are reached. Propane has a minimum ignition energy of just 0.25 millijoules, which means that even a weak discharge, static discharge, say from your clothing, can actually exceed this value and potentially cause an ignition event. To give you an idea of what millijoules are, so say for example in the wintertime I'm actually shuffling my feet on the carpet and I actually touch a door handle and I actually shock myself, that value is actually 20 millijoules, or almost 100 times higher than the energy necessary to ignite propane. In comparison, A2L refrigerant have minimum ignition values 2,000 times higher than that of propane, meaning much higher energy sources are required in order to obtain ignition. This also means that many commonly used electronic components can be used safely with Opteon XL refrigerants. The severity of an accidental ignition can be determined by many factors, such as reactivity, for example, how fast the flame burns, or burning velocity, as well as combustion energy. The higher the gas's reactivity and combustion energy, the larger the potential impact the accident can have on the surrounding area. To put that into perspective, the combustion energy of Opteon XL20 is approximately 5 times lower than that of propane. In addition, it's significantly less reactive than propane, where its burning velocity is actually 30 times slower.
All right, so you need a high concentration of it to light. You need a lot of energy to light it. If you do get it lit, it's pretty wimpy in terms of, comparing it to propane, okay? So one more example. This is more like an Alabama test right here.
Blowtorch tap. Nice flow of refrigerant coming out of the end of the torch.
So that's an A2L refrigerant.
And I've just got a common flint ignition source commonly found in all workshops. And you can't see really any flame propagating there at all. It's in flame. If I increase the velocity, I've still got nothing. So as you can see, the class A2L will not ignite at all. Now the second stage of our demonstration is the HC refrigerant, class A3. So we will open the liquid valve, open our blowtorch tap, our ignition source, and as you can see, it ignites immediately.
All right, no breaking news there, right? So you could kind of get a feel for the difference. When we say flammability, that's what we're looking at. And the previous video was provided by a company called Chemours. I want to give them credit. They're actually the producer of 454B. So, okay, so what? It's a little flammable. If you can light it, it's not that big of a deal. Why the big fuss over it? Because once you attach the word flammability to it, everything changes in terms of your building codes, the UL rating of the unit, insurance requirements, you know, what am I missing here? Unit construction, all this stuff. Your building design, your engineers who are designing HVAC systems for your building, they have to take all this into account. So it's that alone is causing all the fuss over it. If it wasn't for that, it would not be that big of a deal. So, okay. Now, we're done with that part. I'm going to talk to you about timelines. So manufacturers were given a deadline as to when they could ship equipment that has high GWP refrigerants in them. I'm just going to say 410A because that's the most common one. So as of this year, the first of this year, a manufacturer cannot build a unit with 410A and ship it. An air conditioner or a chiller. First of this year. Okay. VRF systems get an extra year. They get an extra year with 410A. Why that is, I have no idea, but that's the way it is. Okay? That's from a manufacturer. So if you were to order a rooftop unit today or a split system, you would not get 410A in it. Get one of the other ones. What if you have units in stock? Does anybody here stock units? Do you have small split systems or whatever? Some people do. Okay, so if you have stock 410A units, for split systems, you have to install and charge them by the 1st of next year. So if you got a 5-ton split system in your warehouse, it's 410A. If you want to be able to sell it, you got to have it sold and installed before this date. VRF systems get another year. Don't know why. Package systems, you get 3 years. So if you're right here and you got a 5-ton package unit, you got till the end of 2028 to legally install that piece of equipment. Make sense? I mean, I know it doesn't make sense, but does everyone follow it? I got to take a few knocks at this stuff every once in a while. It's crazy. So that's for the equipment. What about manufacturing the actual refrigerant itself? Okay, there's a phase down schedule for that, for R410A, because we have, I don't know, 1 million units out there with 410A in it. We still need the refrigerant, right? So they're not just going to cut the faucet off on that. We actually started a 10% reduction in capacity on 2022. So this last year, we started another 40%. So what that means is we're now making half of the R410A than we made a couple years ago. Or the industry made. I say we, I don't know who makes this stuff. DuPont or whatever. And then it's going to go down to 70 and so on and so forth till we get down to 15%. I'm sure this is going to be 0 at some point. And probably sooner than that. But I don't know. All right, so codes and standards. If you want to know what codes and standards are affected, this is a good screen to take a picture of if you're into that kind of thing. We have ASHRAE 15, which has to do with the installation and safety. This is more for engineers when they're designing your system. We have ASHRAE 34, which we talked about earlier, which is the flammability and the LFL, lower flammability rating. And then UL, this is more for equipment manufacturers. UL, has the safety standards to make sure it's mechanically and fireproof and electronically safe, so no one gets electrocuted or thing doesn't catch the building on fire, et cetera. So that UL code is completely different than the ones used for 410A. It's a whole new machine. A couple of terms you might want to get familiar with. RCL, refrigerant concentration limit, we talked about that. It's the maximum amount of refrigerant, before it has the potential to catch fire. So if you're an engineer and you're designing a system that's going to serve this room, you have to look at the RCL limits in the space if there's a potential leak. In other words, you can only have so many pounds of refrigerant pour into the space for every 1,000 cubic feet. We'll look at that a little bit in a second. But we have that today for 410A, but the requirements are a lot stricter because of the flammability side. LFL, lower flammability limit, we talked about that before. Okay, refrigerant concentration limits. So when you're designing a building, pounds of refrigerant you can have into the 1,000 cubic foot space if there was a leak. For R4 today, it was 26. For the new ones, it's much lower. Okay, so that will create a little bit of a challenge for design engineers. More for engineers than for us here in the room, but. And then the lower flammability limit, that comes into effect when we're talking about safeties in terms of monitoring the refrigerant and sending out alarms, which all equipment now is going to have alarms on it to have for today. All right, I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes going through this equation. No, I'm just kidding. So this is how complex this stuff is, okay? This is one screen of about 10 screens of equations that VRF manufacturers use to determine if you can install their system in specific spaces, okay? The good news is the manufacturers are going to have this loaded up in their program, so engineers can work with the manufacturers and figure out the RCL and the LFL and all that stuff. That kind of stuff makes my brain hurt. Okay, if you want to see the latest news on building codes, a good place to go is this long URL here, or you could just type in A2L Refrigerant Building Code Map, and you'll see this map. It's an interactive map. You can pull up your state. It'll show you where you're at with the building codes, because all the building codes need to be updated because of the A2L aspect of the refrigerants. I think they all pretty much are at this point, but I'm not sure. All right, some real life stuff here. Will we run out of 410A? Probably, but I think it's going to be around for a while. There's 7 pallets of it in our Maryland Hobbs office. If you want a pallet, talk to Zach afterwards. Get you a discount, get you a good deal. Is the price going to go up? Yep, it's already gone up quite a bit, and I'm sure it will continue to go up, like what happens to all the refrigerants when we start phasing stuff out. How much it'll go up, I have no idea. Not a bad idea to get a pallet of this stuff if you got a lot of 410A gear taken care of. Question we get all the time, should I replace with a 410A unit or wait for a R32 unit? I'd say that answer depends on many different factors. I just bought a 410A unit for my home. It's sitting on my porch. I got to put it in at some point. But I would have no problem doing that. But if you're an owner and you're going to be in the building for a long time, you might want to wait and get a 32 unit. So you could ask 10 people and you'll get a bunch of different opinions on that. How can I get more training? We'll talk about that on the last slide. If you got guys who want in-depth, like 8-hour training, Zach's going to put something together here locally with purely for technicians, like real hands-on stuff. Not this foo-foo marketing stuff I'm showing you. Okay. What about RCL if you replace? So if you have a 410A unit serving this space, you're going to put an A2L machine in its place. You got to make sure the concentration limits and all that. That's more for engineers will do all that, but you just got to be aware of that. Can you replace a 410A condensing unit with a 454B unit? You cannot do that legally. Okay, so you can't mix and match components. Let's be careful of that. As of right now, parts for 410A units are going to be available indefinitely. There's no talk of phasing those down. So if you need a 410A condensing unit to match with an air handler, you can actually purchase that now. Something you're going to see and hear a lot about, I'm sure, is refrigerant detection systems, RDSs. So every A2L machine that has refrigerant over 4 pounds will have a combination of a sensor and a mitigation board. So the sensor looks at the LFL, the lower flammability limit, okay? If it reaches 25% of that, so still well with under the threshold, sends an alarm to this board, and the board does this. All manufacturers do a little bit differently, but this is the gist of it. Turn the compressors off, the heater off, turn the fan on 100%, which seems counterintuitive, but you're trying to reduce the concentration of the refrigerant. So when these alarms go off, they do have to be manually reset, and they do have a VAV open box signal. So something to be aware of, if you have a VAV system, the box need to be open. When this goes in 100%, you're going to blow your ductwork out. There's a picture of a VRF fan coil with a sensor in it. So you cannot put an A2L refrigerant in a 410A machine. I mean, you can, but you'll be violating a bunch of laws. I'm not sure if it would really work. The UL rating would be null and void. The unit warranty would be null and void. So don't do it. So don't put A2Ls in a 410A machine. R32 has a different oil than 410A and 454B, so be careful of that. That's a big deal. So which is better, R32 or 454B? If you ask the Daikin guy, he's going to say R32. If you ask the guy who sells this, he's going to say that. So it just depends. I think they're both safe. They're both great refrigerants. We have products that have both of them. We represent products that use either of those refrigerants, okay? Most manufacturers, but just a little thing here, most VRF manufacturers are going with 32. Almost all of them, I think. Most AC manufacturers are going with this. Why that is, I don't really know. But I think it's because R32 has been used in VRF systems for a long time around the world, so it's easy for them to do that. Okay, tanks, refrigerant tanks. If you like gray, you're in luck because all the colors are going to gray if they haven't already. If you see a red band, that means it's an A2L. Okay. Tanks today have a rupture disc. The A2L tanks are going to have a relief valve. I forgot the term for a second there. So a relief valve works like this. Pressure gets high, it opens up and it burps out the excess pressure, but then it closes. So it's to prevent the full gas from discharging in your van or whatever. And then the threads are different. So you'll need an adapter for the threads. The purpose of this is to, reduce the risk of someone grabbing an A2L and putting it in a non-A2L machine, which is going to be a lot of paperwork for somebody. It's not going to be fun. So your tools need to be A2L rated if you're going to be working on A2L equipment. So if you don't have any A2L equipment now, but you need to upgrade your tools, just make sure you do it. If they're A2L, I don't think they're much more expensive. You'll see a little thing, A2L certified on them. Not all equipment needs to be certified, but vacuum pumps, things like that, recovery tanks, or recovery, pumps. Name tags, another difference. You're going to now see the year manufactured, so you can tell, okay, it was 2018, it's probably not an A2L refrigerant. Look at it closer, but that's just a little indicator there. It's going to have max refrigerant pressures, and it's going to have the minimum room area this unit could be installed on, okay? It's going to be on the sticker now. Here's an actual A2L machine in the wild. You can see it's got some little red felt things and tape that'll be there for about 8.3 days till the wind blows them off. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? Not knocking the manufacturer. It just doesn't look like it's going to last very long. You'll see there's a flammable gas sticker. So if you see a chiller or a rooftop unit with that on there, and it's an A2L, we know the truth about the flammability. So, and there's some information in the sticker there about the A2L-ness of it too. So.
The unit, which is an A2L refrigerant, this manufacturer, Allied,
this is just another manufacturer example.
This allows you to be able to braze it like before, as long as you flow nitrogen while brazing, or you can cut the stub out and use press fittings if you prefer. So it gives you the options by having that longer stub out. Now for more information,
I like his little pointer thing. That's a friend of mine. And then here's another, just a unique example. I was just trying to pull some examples that show what the A2L sticker will look like. All right, I'm almost done here. Service vehicles, business as usual, nothing special required, no placards, nothing like that. For transportation, you know, on highways federally, you will require a special permit, but it's not hazmat. Okay, it's just a special permit, requires placards and stuff like that. It's pretty minimal, not very disruptive. If you want to know the recommendations in storing A2L refrigerants in your warehouse or facility, this is a great guide by HRA. You can just Google A2L cylinder storage, and you'll see that pop up. It's a little trifold. It has some recommendations in there. Got it? PPE, no changes. Charging systems, business as usual. I think you have an AI presentation coming up. That's AI, Brad Pitt, service tech guy. It's pretty good. That's AI me, by the way. I don't know how well it did. He looks a lot smarter than me. Okay, some considerations. Ensure A2L equipment is approved and installed and operating in the improved for installation and operation in the designated space. Follow manufacturer's literature, which I know everybody in this room does to a T, of course, and properly ground the equipment during installation. Stuff you would normally do is basically what this is saying. Use cones and, you know, around the area. We're working on refrigerants, flammable, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so that's it, right?
Probably.
All right, I'm almost done. 40 more slides. No, so I'm done, really, pretty much. But so what's coming next? I don't know. This is not over. Like, we'll be having this. Maybe you'll invite me back in 5 years, and the EPA says lower it again, and we'll be talking about propane. We'll be talking about something really flammable, which is propane. So expect more changes, is what I'm trying to say. We do have local training available. So Zach, raise your hand. Get with Zach here. So our company invested a lot of time and money sending folks to the ESCO Institute. So we're proctors for ESCO Institute training. So it's a train the trainer program. We sent 4 guys. They train 10 of our field guys who go around the country and train people. So we have a guy who's going to come to this area. The classes are, I think, maximum of 20 people.
Roughly, yeah.
About 20 people. It's real tech training. Okay, it's something they could actually get certified on. There's a test at the end. If they pass it, they get a certification. It's good stuff. I don't know what the cost is. I sent an email. Did you see his response?
$150 a person.
$150 a person for a full day in certification, so it's not bad. Really, it's just paying for the literature and we don't charge for our time. It's just paying for the literature and the tests through the ESCO Institute. So, any questions? This is my email if you got questions.
The hairspray, is that regulated like?
Talking about this hairspray?
No, the seven, did you see the video what they thought depleting the ozone layer now versus the refrigerant?
Hairspray has been regulated, yeah. Yeah, I think that happened a while ago. I think. I got to look it up now.
And what's happening, because I know like these have happened in the past, right? Then the new Freons are really expensive, and then as we phase out the olds,
Yep.
the news come down and they kind of eventually cross. Has that started happening yet with the 32 and the 454, or are they still pretty pricey?
Those refrigerants, I'm not sure if that's changed a whole lot. R410A has gone up. It probably costs, I don't know, are there anybody in this room who buys 410A? Has it gone up? Twice, double what it was a year ago, or? Doubled in the last 3 years. It'll go up, yeah. Other questions, or was that helpful?
Definitely.
Shed some light on the scenario there, so, okay. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.
Thank you. Another thank you for you.
Oh, thank you. Nice.
So that is a whole lot of my world these days, actually. Not only on the building side, we actually make the vehicles, some of our higher end vehicles have AC, so we're doing the transition next year from 134 to the 1234. So,
Oh.
so I'm kind of getting it coming and going, both on the product side and on the building side. So thank you very much. That was definitely helpful. All right. Thank you everybody for coming. Really appreciate everyone spending your time with us today, and we will see you all in February at the Auburn facility. Have a great day.